Welcome back to the In Dreams Our Monster season here at the Birmingham Electric Cinema, and it's a great pleasure to welcome the director of The Howling, Joe Dante. Joe, warm welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for asking me.
We're here to discuss your 1981 release, The Howling. Audiences have just seen it at the Birmingham Electric Cinema. Very briefly, what are your memories of making this film?
Well, my memories are very pleasant. I mean, I had just come off working for Roger Corman on somewhat more reduced budgets than The Howling, although The Howling was not an expensive movie. But it was for another company named Avco Embassy that was currently having a sort of a renaissance of success with slasher movies and horror movies. They had Carpenter, they had Cronenberg. They were doing quite well. And there was this property that they had, The Howling, which is based on a book, and there was a screenplay already, and there was a director who was not me already. And the powers that be were not crazy about the direction that the project was going. And so they asked me to come in, and my partner, Mike Fennell, and we decided that we needed a new approach. That the current adaptation of this book, which didn't make really a lot of sense on its own, needed something else. And so, with a writer friend of mine named Terry Winkless, we sort of started to throw out the old script and do something new. But it was still a little too close to the book, and nobody seemed to be that happy with it. So I decided to go to my go-to guy for fixing bad scripts, John Sayles, who had just done the same trick on Piranha, my previous picture. And John came in, and we worked on trying to do what we thought was a sort of a new age werewolf movie. One of the issues about the picture at the time was that it was considered that with, these werewolf movies, they're all very old fashioned, and there'd been a couple of them in the previous years that had not panned out very well artistically or financially. And so they were a little concerned about, how we were going to approach this. And since Avco's specialty was selling these films as sort of horror slasher pictures, we decided to soft pedal the supernatural aspects in both the approach to the story and also in the advertising. So at the beginning of the movie, it seems to be a serial killer movie, and then gradually we introduced the werewolf tropes. And another thing about the movie that was a little forward thinking was that it's one of the first self-aware horror films in which the characters already know as much as the audience does. So the audience doesn't have to sit through the exposition where they go to the old doctor and he explains what lycanthropy is. The characters already have a working knowledge of pop culture and what a werewolf is. Now, obviously, that has to change in order for the story to work, because if it's only a movie, then it's not real. But one of the benefits of having a horrible character like a vampire or whatever is that, as Dr. Van Helsing says, his strength is that no one will believe him. And so I think John did a particularly good job on a rush. And because the company was staffed with people who trusted the filmmakers, it was a very pleasant experience. I mean, we got to do the movie as well as it could be made under those circumstances.
I think it's really interesting. You keep coming back to your go-to guys and their connection with Roger Corman. And I just wonder, not only in terms of the speed of production, but the politics of those productions, how valuable was it to have that mentoring within, the sort of new world kind of a studio?
Well, Roger's mantra was basically that he was making exploitation movies, but he always wanted to have a point. And so there's a lot of political subtext in even the most egregious, lurid pictures that he was making there, and which were ostensibly for drive-ins and grindhouses and presumably not for thinking audiences. But in fact, they were intelligent movies, and they were much smarter than the competition. And so I think we learned that it was okay to be a little political in your storytelling and to have a point. and reflect the times. You know, and the Howling, it's now a dated movie, but it does reflect the times that it was made in.
I mean, it's fascinating. It most definitely does reflect the times. And I want to sort of draw back on the whole idea of, you said it's definitely self-aware in terms of pop culture, but it's also definitely self-aware in terms of political culture. I mean, it's a film that very explicitly seems to be saying that American news media is salacious, sensational, and exploitative. And I wondered,
Well, that wasn't exactly news at the time. It was just
but
our
it's
take
still
on it.
quite a brave thing to sort of to put it out there. So why did you choose to sort of annex that with the kind of werewolf mythology?
Well, the original story, the lead character is not a news person, and we decide she has a terrible thing happen to her, and she gets sent to a place full of werewolves. But that's the similar thing in the movie. But we tried to make it a little bit more believable by making her a media person, and therefore kind of hip to what's going on in the dark underworld of Los Angeles. And I think that I think the changes that we made were very beneficial. And in the book, the werewolves live in a town that's not even on a major highway. Where it's on a major highway, but it's full of werewolves and it's closed all the time. Anyway, it just wasn't really very helpful. So we really had to kind of make up a new story around the premise.
It's very interesting. And I think, I want to sort of stick, if I can, just for a couple of questions on the fact that it comes out in 1981, a period when America's undergoing some change. And a lot of people have said 1980s America is a period of political conservatism and a kind of backlash against, the so-called liberal 70s and the counterculture. I sort of raise this because the colony and the key werewolves, I'm thinking of Eddie in particular, have a kind of iconography of the counterculture. He has the long hair, and his sister Marsha has a very much kind of freewheeling, kind of free love ethic. And I just wondered, were you playing off that counterculture sort of iconography in any way with those colony figures?
Well, sure, because these were the Reagan years, and it was the Just Say No years, and there was a streak of conservatism was, making itself known in the country, and that didn't necessarily mean that we wanted to go along with that. And so the whole idea of the colony and the doctor being a self-help guru was very current, because there was, of course, the Est movement, where people thought that they were improving themselves by not going to the bathroom, basically. And a lot of that kind of stuff, and it's also very Jim Jones. I mean, the whole thing about the colony, and when it's reported that it's burning, they compare it to Guyana, and there are similarities.
I think another thing about, it's fascinating about the Jim Jones angle, as you say, because I mean, this was the era that conservative America became paranoid about Satanism in the suburbs as well. So anything that didn't quite fit the norm became a kind of point of phobia. One of the most kind of distressing areas for mainstream America, it seems, in the 80s were women, and, the whole row back against sort of gender politics. And I think I raise that because, unlike many other werewolf films of the era, there's a distinct change in your having a female protagonist and a definite female focus to this story. And I wondered why you chose that kind of female focus for the Howling.
Well, we really did inherit it. I mean, the lead character in the book is female, and the characters, we added characters, but there are, a number of characters from the book that perform their functions. But it just seemed like the combination of violence and sex and self-awareness was it was just a melting pot of what people were thinking at the time. And so we were able to, I think, exploit that in terms of trying to make the audience a little more attuned to what ordinarily would be considered a kind of an old-fashioned movie.
A couple of questions I want to throw in here. You might not know, Joe, we have a PhD student at the moment, Kat Collinson. So a warm hello to Kat. I'm sure she'll have watched this. She's doing a PhD on 1980s American horror like The Howling and the importance of special effects. And she had a couple of questions she really wanted to ask you. So I hope you don't mind. These two questions are for Kat Collins. So Kat's first question was around, you know, the landmark special effects by Rob Bottin, way ahead of their time. You know, how closely did you work with special effects coordinators to put their vision on the screen?
Well, the entire premise of the movie that sold it to the studio and the exhibitors was that we said we wanted to do a werewolf transformation in one take, which had not been done, and we didn't want to use the tried and true methods. We wanted to find new ones, and so we hired Rick Baker, who did a lot of preliminary work for us and did some tests that were really very promising. But then Rick was called away to do John Landis's werewolf movie, and because he had always said that he would do it if Landis got the money, and he did. So he said, "Well, I have to leave you in the hands of my mentor, or my protege rather, you know, Rob Bottin." And I had worked with Rob on Piranha when he was like 19. So he was a young guy, but he was in his way a genius. And we realized right away that there was nothing inherently dramatic about doing a werewolf transformation all in one shot. There was later a TV series called Manimal where they had perfected a certain amount of CGI to be able to do that, and it really wasn't. And once you saw it, it was like, okay, that's done. You know, now what? And also, there's no drama, there's no cutting, there's no reactions from the characters, and so we realized that really wasn't the way to go. But it did point us in the way of doing the kind of on-set special effects that Rob was, you know, pioneering, and particularly in the face of not just bladders and those kind of things, but actual change-o heads, they're called, where it's not even when Eddie Quist puts his finger into his skull and pulls out the piece of brain, that's not even a real head, you know. But it's done in a way that I think is pretty clever. And also the idea of werewolves, you know, the initial idea was, well, you know, what about using real wolves? Well, you know, I had seen The Beast Must Die where they used real wolves, and it didn't do much for me. Also we went out to meet some wolves from the wolf trainer, and it became quite apparent that if we were going to really use real animals, it was going to take about nine years to make the movie, because the wolves are not that easily trainable, and the kind of things that they have to do in our movie they'll come off as big dogs, and they won't be able to do any of the things that we want them to do. So we realized we're going to use a combination of puppetry and animatronics and things that Rob built many things that we didn't even get to use. I mean, he had for when the werewolves are in the woods, he built a rocket wolf, which you could shoot off of a platform and it would go through the trees, but unfortunately it had an exhaust coming out, so and there was no CGI to get rid of the exhaust, and so we kind of abandoned that idea. But we did spend a lot of time doing things that didn't work. But what eventually did work was the wolf, the one costume that Rob did make, which when you see the movie, it looks like there's a lot of werewolves. There aren't. There's only one costume. It's all done through cutting. But it's a pretty damn good costume, and it became kind of a template, I think, later for later werewolf movies. But the important thing is that we've seen the same thing done later with CGI, and to my mind, it's just not as effective.
I think it's absolutely, I'd agree with you. And I think part of the effectiveness is just down to the human challenge. So I was fascinated by what you were saying there. It reminded me sort of a year or two ago when I interviewed Pierre David, and he was reflecting on Scanners and the you know, that sort of early special effects in Scanners, same era as The Howling, of course, and the fact that every Saturday would be the day where everything went wrong, where they'd try and blow up heads and it would never work, you know, and in the end they just shoot them with shotguns, and it was just nuts. So was anything stick in your mind as a particular challenge with these incredible transformation scenes?
Well, I think the first thing we tried to do was to put a guy in a suit, as we call it, suitmation, I think they call it. And Rob built a suit, and we had put it on a person, but it just looked like a bear. It didn't have the dimension of a wolf. It didn't have the skinny waist and the legs. So we realized that the only way we were going to do this is by building a costume that was able to be shot from the waist up, and then also built separate legs for it. So the only time you actually see an entire wolf body is a couple of stop motion shots that were originally, there were many more of them, but they just didn't seem to fit in with the general quality of the rest of the special effects. So we ended up not using almost any of them. I think on some of the DVDs there are outtakes. It just looked, when we showed the rough cut to people, they would say, well, what movie is that stuff from? So it was pretty obvious that it wasn't working for our movie.
Nice, nice. Sticking with the special effects briefly, if I could, another question Kat had was just the interrelationship between special effects and humor. You mentioned the self-reflexivity, the way in which maybe, or any comments on the way special effects were used to foreground the kind of slapstick or humorous elements in what you were trying to achieve with the Howling.
Well, the humorous elements come from the absurdity of the story, and I think if you don't buy into that, if you don't acknowledge that, then the audience will not. They'll just start to laugh, and they won't be moved by the story. So one of the things I think that one of the reasons that horror movies are compared to roller coasters is because you go on a roller coaster and you do a big dip and you yell and you scream and the fact that you scream makes you laugh, and then that makes you and any laugh that you can get in a horror movie is useful, because if you time it right, you will have relaxed the audience to a point where you can then hit them with something that they didn't expect. And one of the hallmarks of horror films, at least seen with an audience, is that there is a voluble audience reaction to things, and you never know what they are until you actually screen your film. You can plan whatever you want, but it doesn't really, it takes an actual running with an audience to be able to tell what's working and what's not. And then once you have an idea about that, you can then recalibrate your editing to make the most out of the things that are working best.
Thank you for that. Couple of questions to close, Joe. Obviously, The Howling was a landmark movie in its own right, but it also spawned the whole sort of Fright franchise. 7 other movies located in a variety of different geographical territories. Although you weren't directly involved in those sequels, I just wondered if you had a reflection or thoughts on how that sort of franchise developed. Any thoughts or reflections there?
Well, I think the reason the way it really developed is that the director that I replaced, who is I think billed as one of the producers, had the rights to the book. And he and the author of the book did a sequel, the first sequel, which oddly enough doesn't jibe with what happened in the first movie. It doesn't even reflect the fact that the heroine has turned into a werewolf on television and everybody has seen it. So they just sort of said, well, we'll just make our own movie. So they made their movie, and it was a Sybil Danning take your clothes off movie. And I don't know if it made any money or not. I guess it must have, because then they started making more of them, and then they went to Australia and they made a marsupial werewolf movie, and then people would go back to the book and say, we'll do the book again. So I can't say that I'm an expert on these other Howling movies, because frankly I have a very little memory of seeing any of them. But they keep coming. I mean, there's always another. You go to some film festival and you see a poster for yet another Howling 8, Howling 9, whatever. And so it's any franchise like that always has a life. If you can, and they're always made by different people. I mean, the franchise goes to different groups of people and they put their own stamp on it. But none of them seem to have eclipsed the original. So, and I don't expect that's probably going to happen. Although I think there was talk of a recent remake by some director of note, whose name I can't recall, but nothing ever came of it. But that doesn't mean there won't be another one.
Well, this is a hypothetical nice way to end, I hope. So say the chair came back to you, and it does happen, so you get to revision The Howling. How would you revision it for a 21st century audience?
Well, I think I would have to start from scratch. I mean, I don't think that the things that are interesting about it today, they're so tied to the fact that it was made in 1980, that I don't know what the modern equivalent of that would be. I know that certainly the media landscape is much more complicated than it was then. And I mean, you know, as far as politics goes, I mean, we've had a spate of some of the worst politics in our history just in the past couple of years. And I'm sure it would reflect some of that, you know. But then again, there's always the metaphor about, you know, the reason that they made I Was a Teenage Werewolf is, you know, it was so perfect to have a teenage hero because that's when you start sprouting hair and that's when you start having a libido, and so it's only natural that you would think about, you know, and that's at the heart of the whole werewolf myth. Is it's a very it has a lot to do with power and masculinity and sex, and that's why I think it's particularly interesting when you introduce a female element to it.
That's a wonderful way to end, and it's a classic film that is thought provoking as well as kind of spectacular. And it's been a pleasure to talk about The Howling with you. Thank you so much, Joe Dante.
Well, thanks.